USS Indianapolis, a forgotten WWII tragedy. On July 30th, 1945, in the final uncertain days of World War II, the USS Indianapolis was torpedoed and sunk by a Japanese submarine in the vast, dark waters of the Pacific Ocean. What unfolded over the next 5 days became one of the most horrifying naval disasters in American history. But the story of the Indianapolis is not just a tale of war. It's a story of sacrifice, survival, bureaucratic failure, and ultimately, redemption. The USS Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser measuring over 180 meters, armed with 9 8-inch guns and multiple anti-aircraft systems. She was a ship built for power and speed. She had already played a vital role in the Pacific theater, including bombarding Japanese positions and escorting aircraft carriers. By the summer of 1945, the war was nearing its end, but few knew exactly how. That's when Indianapolis was given a secret mission, one of the most important of the entire war. She was tasked with delivering the core components of Little Boy, the first atomic bomb, to the island of Tinian. The crew didn't know what they were carrying. The mission was so secret, most didn't even know it had succeeded. But it did. The components were delivered. Hiroshima's fate was sealed. And then the ship disappeared. After completing the delivery, Indianapolis departed Guam without an escort. Unusual, but not unheard of, given the Navy's assumption that Japanese forces were too weakened to be a threat. But they were wrong. In the early hours of July 30th, 1945, Japanese submarine the WWII, commanded by Mochitsura Hashimoto, spotted the cruiser. It launched 6 torpedoes. 2 of them found their mark. One exploded near the bow. The second struck amidships, igniting aviation fuel and ammunition. The resulting explosions were catastrophic. Within just 12 minutes, the USS Indianapolis rolled to her side and sank beneath the waves. Roughly 300 sailors went down with the ship. The remaining 900 were left floating in open water, alone, injured, and unaware that no one was coming. For the next 5 days, they drifted in the sweltering heat, their numbers dwindling by the hour. They had no lifeboats, only a few life jackets, no fresh water, no shade, no real hope. The sun burned their exposed skin during the day. At night, they froze and fought off hallucinations. Men began to drink seawater out of desperation, only to succumb to dehydration and madness. But the worst was yet to come. The ocean around them was infested with oceanic white-tip sharks, aggressive, relentless predators. These weren't isolated attacks. Survivors described it as a feeding frenzy. You could be talking to a buddy 1 minute, and the next he'd be dragged beneath the surface. What makes this tragedy even more haunting is the silence that followed. The Indianapolis was expected to arrive in Leyte Gulf on July 31st. But when it didn't show up, no one noticed. No search was launched. No alarm was raised. Because of wartime secrecy and flawed communication systems, the ship's route hadn't been tracked. For 4 days, nearly 900 men suffered unimaginable conditions while the rest of the world remained unaware. It wasn't until a patrol plane on a routine flight happened to spot the oil slick and floating bodies that a rescue was finally initiated. That was August 2nd. By the time help arrived, only 316 men remained alive. The others had been claimed by exposure, dehydration, drowning, and sharks. The aftermath should have focused on honoring the survivors and mourning the dead, but instead, the U.S. Navy focused on assigning blame. Captain Charles B. McVay III, the Indianapolis's commanding officer, was court-martialed for failing to zigzag, a defensive maneuver used to avoid submarine attacks. It was a controversial and widely criticized decision. Survivors testified that zigzagging wouldn't have mattered. Even the commander of the Japanese submarine, Hashimoto himself, testified at McVay's trial, stating that the zigzag would not have changed the outcome. Still, McVay was found guilty. He became the only U.S. Navy captain court-martialed for losing his ship during wartime. Public harassment followed him for years. Grieving families sent him hate mail. Strangers blamed him for their sons' deaths. In 1968, Charles McVay took his own life with his Navy-issued revolver. In his hand was a toy sailor, perhaps a gift from one of the families he'd once led. For decades, the Indianapolis was little more than a footnote in history books, overshadowed by the atomic bombings, the Nuremberg trials, the triumph of VE Day. But the survivors refused to let it be forgotten. They met every year. They shared their stories. They honored their fallen brothers and fought to restore McVay's name. It took the efforts of a 12-year-old student, Hunter Scott, who, after hearing the story in the movie Jaws, began researching the tragedy for a school project. His work gained national attention and reignited public interest. In 2000, Congress passed a resolution exonerating Captain McVay. President Bill Clinton signed it into law. Justice, delayed for over 50 years, had finally arrived. In 2017, the wreck of the USS Indianapolis was discovered at the bottom of the Philippine Sea, nearly 5,500 meters below the surface. It was a somber moment of closure for families and survivors alike. But the true legacy of the Indianapolis doesn't lie in twisted metal or faded military records. It lives on in the courage of the sailors who clung to life against impossible odds. It lives in the bond between shipmates who refused to abandon one another, even as the sea turned against them. And it lives in the story itself, a haunting, heroic chapter of history that almost disappeared. So when you remember the events of World War II, think not just of battles and victories. Think of the ship that vanished. Think of the 900 men who waited in the dark. And remember their pain, their perseverance, and the injustice they endured. The story of the USS Indianapolis is more than a military tragedy. It's a reminder of duty, of sacrifice, and of the human cost of war. They were more than sailors. They were sons, brothers, fathers, and friends, and they deserve to be remembered.